Hey, darling, can you hear me?
Hey,
Hi, how are
right?
you?
I'm all right. You
Yeah, I'm good. Actually. I am good.
in Somerset?
Yeah, yeah, in the wild.
Snowy?
What's that?
Snowy at the moment? Is it much snow?
Fucking grass.
No,
Really cold, but actually quite beautiful. Like really kind of sunny and bright and disturbingly fresh.
right, but
What,
not snow.
what about you? What's it like when you just step outside? Is London sort of semi-normal, or does it feel like the first?
Well, I'm in where I am is quite different. Really. I think it depends where you are. I mean, where I am, it's relatively normal. Yeah.
It must be insane for you. I mean, I've travelled. I'm used to sort of being relatively on the move, but you haven't been out in a club environment or on an aeroplane to DJ somewhere or to play a show. You must have been active in that kind of way since you were like 19, 17.
Yeah. I mean, also, I was lucky when I was a kid. We went on holiday, so I've always gone away. Every year you went, somewhere. So yeah, it's the first time I haven't been anywhere since March. So I know a lot of people went away last summer, but
Do you reckon you'll feel in any way permanently changed by this? Like let's say summer,
yeah, I don't
everything
want
back
to do.
to
I don't
normal.
want to work again in the way I worked before COVID.
Yeah, you're gonna put your record bag on and just sort of get in a cab to the airport and be like, all right, here we go, back to life how it used to be? Or do you think you're just going to feel
But
crazy?
I don't think it's going to go back to that, and not for a long. Not. I don't think it'll ever go back to that. Unfortunately, I think it's. And I don't think it will. I don't think it will be. It's going to be a very different dynamic. It's never going to. It's not. It's going to be different.
You just think seismic change in terms of like.
Well, I don't think traveling's ever going to be the same again, because it doesn't matter whether we're COVID free or not. We're going to be. The impact of COVID is going to have an impact on the way that all of those things are going to change financially, economically. It's not just COVID as well. We've got green issues, we've got everything. So COVID, if you look at most economic reports, all it's done is sped up something that was going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
Which means travel, which means food, which means social, society as a whole, how we deal with that financially. All of these things are things in the high street. All that stuff was going to change. I mean, for me, I suppose in many ways I'm lucky that I did what I did, and we've all experienced those things, and it's not something that I'm not necessarily craving to go away. Sorry, one sec. Hey, sweetheart. Hey, I'm now in a Zoom. I'll be about 20 minutes. Can I call you back then? All right. Okay. I'll speak to you in a minute. Bye. I don't know. I just think that there's so many things needed to change, and I think that this is sort of the beginning of things changing. And I think it will.
Our hand on this sustainability issue. Hey, so yeah.
But I also think that it's things about there's a lot of things that positively will come out of. Hopefully, will come out of this. I mean, but I just think I don't think there's going to be some seismic change in the next couple of years of us. What we think we're going back to. I think that there will be obviously things are going to open up and blah blah blah. But I think the dynamic of how people behave is going to be affected. And you've got a generation of young people that if you're a kid now growing up in this, it's the way that people interact is going to be different. So, but I do think that potentially the arts and music and things like that are going to be more. Kind of people will probably value them more. I think people's values are going to change, which in a positive way.
I was going to say that do you feel that you will sort of soundtrack our next chapter? Like, do you feel this is inspiring your next step, your next piece of work in this sort of, I don't know if you feel the same, but I do feel this connectivity, and I wouldn't have reached out to people to sort of remix really ever before, but I just felt that there was this connectivity between us as artists, knowing that people I hardly knew, or people like yourselves I work with but haven't spoken to for months, but it was a sense of having the license to just reach out and say, we just sort of collaborate in a way that we might not have done before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, there's sort of this because of people's time and you know, what the effects of what's gone on last year. I think it's definitely had an, you know, an effect in the way that communication is, and how, you know, that people maybe that wouldn't have time on their hands do, and people are looking at other ways to work together, and maybe more open to collaboration, and, you know, but then also I've noticed it doesn't always work that way as well. You know, I think we're still in a period where we're sort of trying to work things out. So it's an interesting time. I don't quite know, you know, what's going on half the time, to be honest.
There's a weird thing, isn't there? We're sort of some of us have got lots of time on our hands, and then if you commit to a few projects, then suddenly you are really busy, and actually you can't.
I think it all depends on the situation and, you know, economics for people, doesn't it? I mean, you know, I don't have young children, so I think if you had, you know, 3 young kids right now, well, I know lots of my friends that do, that creates a very different dynamic to working together. It's made things a lot harder.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, thanks for doing this remix for me. I know you've done a remix with Duke Spirit before, and I know that remixing is just like such a massive part of your creative life, really. And I just wondered what you felt about it in terms of its significance in our culture now, because there's a sense of connectivity and playfulness of remixing. There's also a necessity of, like, you create a bit more currency and exchange between different artists, but you've done so much remixing from the point of view of soundtrack and your love of film, that remixing must just feel.
I mean, but remixing where I started was first. No, other than DJing, remixing was the second sort of thing that I got into. So it was the way we sort of opened the door into trying to make records. And at that time, I was working with Tim Goldsworthy, and you know, the first thing I did was I must have been about 17, I think, for Island Records. Never came out. Wasn't very good, but it was a way of opening the doors.
Can't we hear it?
No, it's not. It's never coming out, and it never did come out. But it was for an artist called Ronnie Jordan, who was a jazz guitarist who had a hit at the time with a cover version of So What. Yeah, it was sort of, you know, he was kind of big in the talking loud kind of world.
Sort of like the height of acid jazz kind of.
Yeah, well, yeah, and sort of, you know, so I was DJing a lot, and I was actually DJing at the time in Talking Loud. Used to do a Saturday night in the Fridge, and I was DJing there. And I had friends at Island Records, and I used to go to all the record labels to get promos and sort of blag to get promos. So I sort of eventually blagged my way into, from, you know, working in Honest John's and DJing and stuff like that, to doing my first remix. And I think remixing was always very synonymous with the culture that I came on, which is from sort of DJ culture, and how records could be reinterpreted to fit into different environments. So you can take a song, you know, a ballad, and remix it, and then it could be played at the time in a club, you know. So it, you know, in that way, it was always really exciting, the idea of being able to collage and take, and a lot of things that you know, you'd like certain elements from a song, and a lot of think that other elements wouldn't work, and how you could then, you know, remix that, reconstruct that, and put, you know, create something new out of it. And so for me, it's always been a way of experimenting and being able to sort of try ideas out, and, you know, so a lot of remixing sort of can build a foundation for then what later records come out of that, and records that you end up making for yourself.
So away from that craft, from that remixing craft, you totally imported all of that experience and experimental play into sort of making UNKLE records, then, I guess, what you're saying.
Yeah, even though it's quite funny with UNKLE, because there's sort of, it seems to, historically there's sort of seemed to be a divide of what we wanted to do in the studio to make an album, what we did remix wise. There was always this thing of, it can't sound like a remix when you're making your own record, or, you know, oh, that's fine, that's more, that's for that environment, we need, you know. So there's always, so in many ways I've sort of found myself recently come back to a place where it's kind of like, you know, I don't have those kind of, that sort of boundary in the way I'm making my own records. But it was quite interesting how a lot of the time, you know, what you were sort of, how you were experimenting with what you were doing for other people compared to what you ended up making for yourself could be quite different.
You feel also, now that we've lived through this astonishingly strange time, I feel more and more like, oh, I really need to stop analysing what I thought fitted into you know, whatever genre I thought I was in now. I mean, it's really sort of exploded the boundary edges of everything.
Well,
Really.
I think that's happened with music as well. You know, the fact that, you know, we're so, you know, when I started, there were so many more boundaries in where you could take something or do something, and a lot of the time that was what people, you know, like myself and the community of people I was working with wanted to try and change, you know, and that you could combine and mix all these elements up and take, you know, because growing up on hip hop in the early days was very much about taking all of these elements and trying to make something new out of it. And when you go back to the basis of that with something like, you know, Bambaataa and the sort of really early, you know, Grandmaster Flash, you know, they were taking everything from, you know, Gary Newman to you know, James Brown, and how they mixed all that up to create something. And you know, the idea was to take the breaks, the bits, the best bits out of a song and make new songs out of it. And so, you know, for me, it was always about trying to kind of how you could really mix things up. And I think with remixing, it gave us a slightly more license to be able to be a bit more experimental in many ways, because it wasn't your song. You weren't necessarily going for, you know, especially when I started, they weren't necessarily what you were doing to get the record in the charts. It wasn't what's going to be played on the radio. It was what was for the clubs, and the club as they are still now. But I think, you know, there was a different industry then that things really served a greater purpose. And, you know, to have a big club record, a remix, you know, in a club was, you know, could generate, you know, and make a record very big within a certain world. So there were economics about how records were being sold, because you could have one record that would appeal to certain people, but that same record could appeal to different, you know, if it was a drum and bass remix, if it was a house remix, a hip hop remix, those different mixes would appeal to certain different genres, which had their own culture, their own world, and their own economics. So it kind of all fed into each other, you know, the whole way.
The feedback on that would have been really quick, wouldn't it? I mean, you wouldn't have to have a big marketing plan. You just be like, I chucked this on, I was spinning this.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing. It's direct, so it's like radio. You know, you're playing it. You put, you know, what was amazing, and a lot of the time was also when I started doing remixes, you wanted to have, as a DJ, the whole thing was to have exclusive new music, and every week you were playing in the club. You know, for example, when I was sort of 19, 20, when I started, you know, really making records, I was doing bar rumba. That's how it is, and I was doing that on a Monday night, every Monday. I was then doing probably Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday in another city, country, another club, another event, and the whole thing is you wanted new records, new music to keep playing. Yeah. And so, you know, you were constantly trying to do remixes and do stuff, so you had a kind of ownership, so you could play exclusive things that were yours, you know. Yeah. So part of that was that as well, where you wanted to have this kind of constant sort of armory of records that you could play that nobody else would have, or at least be exclusive with it. Yeah. Where you could then be the first person to play it. So a lot of that's sort of how a lot of that, you know, what happened as that sort of was developing. You know, you'd go and cut a dub plate. You know, in those days you'd be cutting acetates of tracks. So you didn't play CDs or cassettes.
They'd wear out though. They wouldn't last. Yeah. They wouldn't last your whole sort of next couple of years DJing. Then you'd be like, oh.
Well, it depends. Some were better than others, but yeah, they, you know, they definitely got worn. You know, there was a wear and tear, but there was, you know, it was a really, you know, there was a kind of that very quick turnaround. I mean, you can do, in many ways now it's all quicker because you can just upload your record. But also there was a way that there was a bit more time, because records, you know, when I started remixing, you know, you'd have the first person would have a dub plate, or maybe and you know, the person that did it, let's say it was me, then you'd give that to a couple of people, they'd start playing it, and then it would get, you know, put on white label, and then another 50 people would get it, and then the promo would come, and that would go to, you know, in sort of staggered out to various DJs depending on probably your popularity. So there was a whole process, and a record would be built in that way over a longer period of time. So by, you know, from a dub plate being made to the actual record coming out, it could be 6 months, it could be 3 months, it could be a year. But that process was how you built records. You didn't have the internet, you didn't have, you know, Facebook and Instagram and, you know, all of these ways that you can communicate and kind of get things to people quicker. So it was, you know, there was a different sort of way that records were being promoted at that time based on the technology and the way that communication was, you know. But that was exciting because you could build records in a different way.
Yeah,
you know?
now you just ping something on a platform, and if you don't read immediately the response that you want, I guess it, you know, you can feel sort of very premature disappointment, but actually it's still growing out there, it's still being shared.
Yeah, and it goes in a different way now. You know, it tends to be like, you know, records tend to have a life after when they come out in a different way. That, you know, it's kind of interesting that when when I started putting records out and doing remixing, everything was about that day the record came out, and you know, it was very much about how to get to that point. And now it's a much longer. Things have you know, the way that we interact with music has created a different way that music can kind of live, and you know, some which may be more positive than others. It's a real anomaly in many ways now, how music exists. And what's, you know, in one way what's amazing is a record can come out and can start really low and go very high. When I started, it tended to be you went very high and then it would go down. It wouldn't go back up.
Right, yeah.
You know.
What have you put out this in the pandemic then? You've had the Girls of the Internet remix. Did you put out a couple of other things? And then
I've been sort of just trying to adapt and try some things out. So I've been working on various different projects, but last year was very much about just trying to kind of take everything in, and I put out some remixes. There was some remixes by Girls of the Internet, some tracks on the road, the last two albums, and there was Amtrak did some remixes. There was a new track that I remixed from the road, Armour, that a version of that came out.
Yeah, right.
And then I did various remixes, you know, including yourself. And a few other things that I've been doing, and then I've been working on interesting enough, a whole remix project where I've been working on, you know, sort of doing some new tracks and looking back at the last few years of work and sort of kind of going in and reconstructing and experimenting with some of that stuff, just because I wanted to, you know, I had the time to sort of look at things in a different way, but I wasn't also in a situation where, whilst you can collaborate, it wasn't so easy to just get in a studio. It wasn't like, oh, we can go and record an orchestra or go and record a kids choir or put a band in the studio. It became all a little bit more complicated.
Yeah,
so
slightly more solitary experience.
Yeah, so I sort of felt like going back into a bit more of a sort of recycling phase of work, and sort of. Yeah, so that's where I've been.
The single that has just come out, Eska's vocal, the lyric, everything's just fantastic. I texted you because I was just
no, it's very beautiful.
It's beautiful.
It's got the most amazing voice.
Am I being really ignorant? And I might be, and I apologise, but it says Exodus revisited. Is that because is that some territory?
It's a cover of from the film Exodus. It's a kind of the standard. It's a big standard song that was then the influence for Bob Marley, and Jimmy Scott did an amazing.
So it has a long history.
Yeah. And it was actually originally, because, as I said, I sort of went back and started, you know, looking at, you know, recycling and sort of reconstructing and playing around with tracks that I've either had recorded that hadn't been out, or existing work, and doing some new stuff. Exodus was something that I'd done originally for Rick Owens' fashion show in Paris, where we did a live performance where I worked on the music and Eska worked with me, and she sang the song with two other vocalists live for this fashion show.
A show where they had bodies models.
Yeah.
That was mine.
So we did a demo kind of the song with you know, she did a vocal where I would work to that vocal based on the fact we were going to do a live performance, so I could work on the music. And sort of during the summer last year, I was just listening back to things, and I'd always remembered that it was a really amazing vocal she did. So I went back and looked at it, and worked with Mink Dorian, who has worked on the last couple of records, and sort of just took the vocal and redid them.
Yeah, I knew I was missing some information there. I knew there's something ignorant there, but yeah, that's yeah, well, it's incredible. It sounds just beautiful. Yeah.
So like I said, I've been sort of doing that's, I've been working on some new stuff that's coming out this year, and yeah, just working on lots of things, just more projects, and you know, to sort of come out. I'm sort of also been, you know, taking the time with COVID to, and you know, because I've not been traveling and things like that, to be able to sort of focus on you know, what I'm doing with UNKLE and the kind of way I want to put out records and archiving and working on new websites, all that kind of stuff, you know, the stuff that I never get to do.
Quite well. Do you actually really appreciate this like strange pause in the pace?
I've appreciated a pause in the sense that I think that for me, having that forced upon you after being, you know, I've been working, as many people have, believe me, you know, but I've been working since I was, you know, I left school at 16, and I've been doing this, and I've never stopped. It's sort of been a bit of a snowball, and I've never been good at giving myself the time to stop, or knowing quite how to. So it's been needed to a degree for myself, just to be able to kind of have a bit of a pause and focus on things that I've needed to deal with that I haven't been able to, or you know, you would just end up not being, you know, having the time or whatever. So in that way, yes, there are lots of positive things that have come out of it, but as all of us, there are, you know, it's not something that I'm not, you know, I'm not glad we're in the place we are, but
no,
but you know, I'm fortunate that I've been able to try and take, you know, a lot of positive out of it. I think again, it's very circumstantial. So there's a lot of people I know that obviously it's much harder, you know.
I think it's just this sort of undefinable terms, isn't it? If that's the right word, but just the fact that, you know, we haven't really known when it will end. Maybe now we have a rough sketch, but even that we're not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems like we're in, you know, we're building to positive steps to move forward. I think it's just how long things take and what those changes are, and I think there's going to be, you know, positives and negatives.
Do you miss?
But I do think the moment that we can go out and perform live, and the moment that people get to, you know, go to those kinds of events, I think it will be one hell of a party.
Yeah, you're
it's
the
going to
third
be like
person.
Summer of Love, right? It will be extraordinary.
To say that in about
it will just be probably the most extraordinary period, you know.
Yeah, there's this big celebration of life coming, isn't there? It's like it's in the post that when this intimacy is permitted, you know, just human touch and sharing,
appreciation of those things. And you know, and I think that what's, you know, hopefully which will be very positive will come out of this is the appreciation of community and art and what it brings, and that how much you need it, because we have been in a period for a long time where I think art and music, especially music, has been undervalued in so many ways.
Well, as represented in the Brexit deal, it's been completely forgotten how we may travel throughout Europe to, you know, bring what we have to people who would like to pay to see it, and that's been completely missed out. I mean, it's
the wonders of the English establishment,
political establishment.
It always seems all right if it's maybe the more highbrow, it's opera or something like that. We have to protect the institutions, but not the
they've
contemporary.
They've probably got their carnets already sorted for those guys, but yeah.
But I do think optimistically those things will be resolved. I think there's too much money in it to start. So at the end of the day, you know, economics play a big key in that. But it just
yeah.
I think it will. I think it, you know, it's just I think it just shows, like, you know, like with COVID, I think COVID is like a giant mirror to the reality of a lot of things. It's amplified things. It kind of, and unfortunately, it's things like that where you realize that what the priorities in the people that we put, the governments and the people that we hope to represent us, you see the disparities in how that works. And I think that, so, you know, it's an interesting time where I think you're seeing what people really you know, where people's priorities lie. And actually
that idea of the mirror is actually just, yeah, that's really, really well put. I mean, I don't think, I have no science here, but I think symbolically it's no fucking coincidence that we've lived through last year with, you know, one of the main messages that we were all kind of digesting was the "I can't breathe," you know, devastating piece of news for the Black community and well, for everybody. But that whole kind of "I can't breathe" message was just like this desperate, hellish mantra against the backdrop of everything that's happening with the environment and the virus that affects your breathing. You know, it's just too,
yeah, and all the politics that surrounded it, you know, especially in the Western world, where we voted in people that were sort of based on a kind of, you know, war cry type of rhetoric and division and nationalism, and you know, that's not what's going to work for us to get through these kinds of problems. And I think, you know, this is a moment in time where we kind of have to, you know, there's going to be AC and BC, and there's before COVID and after COVID. And I think that before COVID, we you know, the world is highly materialistic and it's like sort of the collapse of ancient Rome. I think we're seeing it's sort of, you know, and
I don't think it's over dramatic to say that either. I can only hope that those of us that can really reconnect with our empathetic state of mind will be the ones that can be the change. You know, I feel like empathy is the new
and I believe that will happen. I think, you know, optimistically, I think that will, you know, I think we're starting to see that happen.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
because
I know
most people have come together during this. You know, most people, you know, are trying to support and build and love with one another within their communities, and that, you know, can stem to the place you live in or the community of creativity or that you work with, you know, your work environment. You know, I think overwhelmingly most people have been being very loving and supporting. You know.
That's been my experience as well. And actually just make, I mean, so my album that came out in August is now going to be released as a remix album. And that's sort of the manifestation of what you're saying. Is I just reached out to other people who I expected were, you know, not on a flight and not playing a festival and not as active as they would have been. And even though I was a little shy, you know, I've been able to just pull in these great remixes to make an album that sort of demonstrates the fact that we are actually intrinsically connected and intrinsically loving people, loving artists, you know. Yeah.
No, it's good.
So listen, I know you've got to go, and you've ended on a wonderful, optimistic note there, and you've made me feel a lot more positive. So I'll let you go, and I'm sure we'll speak in the next couple of months. Take care, love.
Bye.
Cheers, mate.
Bye.